birth control advertising, should abstinence or methods of contraception be advocated? And joining us today are Joan Coombs, Deputy Executive Director of Planned Parenthood of New York City, and she believes opposing the advertisement of contraceptives is not in the best interest of people. And the opposing point of view is held by Barbara McGuigan of the pro-life group, the Human Life International. She says advertising contraceptives is morally wrong, and abstinence is the answer if you want to avoid an unwanted pregnancy and disease. Barbara, yes. Why would anyone oppose anything that would bring unwanted children into the world?
Well, you see, we have no choice. The reason being that we are concerned about the right to life of every human being made in the image and likeness of God. So it's impossible for us to really condone any type of advertisement for contraceptives. It's impossible for us to, for example, the Surgeon General's report saying that a fail-safe method for an always deadly disease, when he knows full well that the condom is not 100% effective. It's impossible for us to condone contraception knowing that 81% of all abortions are the result of abused sex.
Abused sex meaning sex outside of marriage.
Sex outside of marriage, performed on unmarried women. And when you consider...
Wait a minute, I just want to make sure. You did say sex performed on unmarried women?
I'm sorry, abortions performed on unmarried women are the result. 81% of all abortions are the result of abused sex.
Joan, let's go to you. And
Yes,
do you think that hers is a naive approach and one that is really not dealing with reality as you see it?
Well, yes, I do, and I'm a little surprised at it. I don't believe it's with the mainstream of American people. The issue here is that I would have thought we could all stand together on our desire to reduce unintended pregnancy and therefore to reduce our reliance on abortion. And we know so much about that. We know from the other developed countries who are so much better at this than we are, that one of the things we must bring together is what American people really believe, and most Americans believe in family planning, and bring that together with a public climate. In America, it's amazing that as many of us are successful at preventing unintended pregnancy as we are. There's a climate here that is a public climate, and by that I'm talking about the media and some of the organized Roman Catholic Church leaders that do not, in fact, give a climate that supports people, that says avoiding unintended pregnancy is a good thing. It's something we all expect of each other, and it's something that we care about, and people we love, we expect them to do this.
Barbara?
What most people don't understand, though, is that contraception is the gateway to abortion. You see, the contraceptive mentality says that I will prevent life, and it is taken to a further extent in abortion, saying, I will prevent life at all costs. Now, right now, Joan, in the United States, we have a group of grown men promoting sex between grown men and young boys. We have over 200 child pornography publications being circulated in the United States. We have all kinds of sexual abuses of children in our daycare centers, preschools with incestuous...
Why are you bringing this into this conversation?
Okay.
Thank you. I was about to ask
Because what you must understand, this is so sick, and people say, how did this all begin and when is it going to end? But when you really examine the guts of the contraceptive mentality, you see that if you don't have any kind of inner...
Let's let her finish.
Yes. If you don't have any inner meaning or purpose to your sexuality, if sex is something strictly for pleasure only, or even recreational,
is it strictly for procreation in your view? Is that it?
I think it is the life, love, and pleasure gift from the inventor, you see. The life, love, and pleasure gift.
But you didn't really answer my question. Is it just for procreation?
No.
Okay. Joan? Okay.
Yes, thank you. You know, Barbara, this country was based on a marvelous idea, and that marvelous idea is the separation of church and state. And I will fight down to the bottom line for your beliefs, as I would hope you would fight for mine, which is part of what this country is based on. And in fact, not all Americans believe, and in fact, most Americans would not agree with you. And it is not the churches who are to determine public policy, and it's not the churches who can be in the bedroom with us and determine what our most private behavior is, but it's individual Americans who must share that responsibility, accept that responsibility, and it's a part of being a grown, mature, healthy sexual individual and a responsible human being.
Joan, I would like to ask you something, if I may. I mean, one might say, why aren't you running any ads in this campaign that say you have a right to say no to sex as opposed to make sure you use contraception?
This campaign, first of all, when there is a line in the campaign, in the commercial that you've seen, and by the way, the campaign includes 2 30-second spots, one in English, one in Spanish, radio spots, and a series of posters and flyers. But this particular commercial is geared at people who are in fact sexually active and who are trying very hard to avoid unintended pregnancy, but it also encompasses all of the methods. There's a line in there that talks about from saying no to taking the pill. And the inference there, the implication there is that different times in your life, different methods will be what's appropriate for you. And there are times where abstinence may be appropriate for you, and we support that. And there are times where other methods may be appropriate for you on the basis of your health, your age, your financial circumstances, your relationship, and your religious beliefs. And we will support whatever that is.
You know, it really surprises me, Joan, being in New York, that you would not recognize that just a couple of days ago, Mayor Koch said that the only safe sex is abstinence. Now, here's a very liberal person. You must understand, Joan, that there's a direct connection between AIDS, now that we see, and the birth control pill. Just recently at the AIDS conference in Washington, D.C. in June, Dr. Frank Plummer from the University of Manitoba did a study of 115 prostitutes in Kenya. And what he found was that after 2 years, 64% of these prostitutes who had a negative test result for AIDS, just 2 years later, tested positive for AIDS. Every single one of these prostitutes was on the pill. He noticed that an extremely low infection rate occurred with those prostitutes who were not on the pill. Now, let me get to the point of this. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta recognizes that there is a definite link between the pill and chlamydia, a venereal disease, right? Dr. Plummer feels that perhaps the chlamydia that causes the genital sores, genital ulcers, whatever, could be very instrumental in facilitating the easier spread of the AIDS virus. We're talking about an open sore here. So this is something that can't be scoffed at, can't be laughed at, and I wonder what Planned Parenthood is doing to promote abstinence.
Joan, that's an interesting point, and certainly if anything would in any way allow greater efficiency of the transmission of AIDS, it's something that you would, I'm sure, want to investigate and to say something about.
That's correct. I would also point out, I mean, that is not what we're here to talk about. I noticed that you keep focusing on very specific things. I'd also point out that there's a great deal of talk by the CDC, as there was in Washington and have been by other scientists, that there are other methods that have to do with contraception that are, in fact, helpful in avoiding STDs, and that has to do with spermicides. So, I mean, let's look at both sides of this, and the issue of AIDS is a connected but separate issue. I mean, there are connections, but it is not what we're here to talk about today.
Well, as a matter of fact, let me ask Barbara something about that. Barbara, maybe this is the first step. I think that there are many experts who would suggest to you that to take sexually active people and tell them that abstinence is their only way of dealing with their sexuality would not be something they would entertain, but maybe if they would start with birth control, you would then have them taking some control over their sexuality and then examining whether abstinence may be in their best interest.
There is nothing wrong with controlling births. Not even the Catholic Church is against controlling births. It's how you do this.
Phones, and we have Rick from Seattle. Hi, Rick, welcome.
Hi, how are you today?
Okay, go ahead.
Great. Well, one thing my stand on this is that I'm for abstinence. It's something that I've looked at, and I've had several experiences in my life with my fiancée that birth control was kind of breeding immorality between us.
Well, what does that mean? Did that make you suspicious of her?
Well, what it did was it yes, a little bit. You know, when you mention it and I think about it, yes, it did. But what it did was it tended to make sex extremely casual thing, like going to the refrigerator for something to eat.
That's an interesting analogy. Let's go to Joan on that. Joan, do you think that promoting contraception in some way promotes casual sex?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, we believe that it promotes a more caring, loving relationship in terms of dealing with the question of whether or not to conceive. One of the questions I would have had for Rick is, can he accept the fact that over 85% of Americans would not agree with him? I mean, all of the polls, and the Harris polls and the recent polls over the last several years indicate the wide support that Americans have for family planning, for birth control.
Barbara?
Well, I think that most Americans have no idea of natural family planning, which is a perfectly natural and safe, healthy, effective method of family planning, of spacing your children or deciding that your family is complete. I would like to bring up something about teaching chastity as an option, if that's all right, Sonia, because I really believe that teaching chastity as an option is very misleading and confusing and even degrading to the dignity of people, because well, I always say teaching chastity as an option is like teaching teenagers in a substance abuse class never to drive while drunk. But if they do, wear a seatbelt. Planned Parenthood, the greatest perverter of sex all over the world, goes into our public schools and teaches chastity. They say, oh, well, certainly you can be chaste. You can say no. No is a love word. I've heard this before. But if you choose to be sexually active, you can always use this drug, plug, jelly, or jam, and then you can suit up for sex.
Okay,
may I reply?
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me take one more call, and then I will let you reply. But I am so anxious to hear from our viewers. Mary from Moscow, Idaho.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I disagree very much with Barbara, the pro-lifer, and of course I am very much for pro-life, but I think that using contraceptives does promote life, and I'd like to say that I support Joan very much and all the work that Planned Parenthood has done, and I think it's a shame that such a narrow-minded person such as Barbara has the opportunity to be in the public eye.
Well, don't you agree, though, that that's part of what makes this country so wonderful and delicious, because it gives you an opportunity to make a choice, which is why we do these debates? Joan, you had a comment to make.
Yes, it concerns teenagers, young people. There's no question that it's appropriate to urge young people to be abstinent and to delay sexual activity. But on the other hand, we now know that 56% of teenagers in this country are sexually active, and it seems to me that at this point we have a choice. And that choice is to help them avoid unintended pregnancy once they've decided to do this. And if not, then we turn our backs on them and we say to them, you should be vulnerable to pregnancy. And it seems to me that that's a very punitive attitude, and that's a severe punishment for being sexually active and unintended pregnancy.
Let's go on to Maureen from the state of Washington. Hi, Maureen.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to state that I feel that you can keep the church out of the bedroom, but you can't keep God out of the bedroom. And I believe that we are going to have to start going back to the Bible and going back to the fundamentals. God made us, and He made the rules by which we should abide. And I think that people that are promoting birth control are promoting sexual promiscuity, and they have blood on their hands, because with this AIDS epidemic, we can't afford that.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let's go to Patricia from El Paso, Texas. Patricia?
Good afternoon. How are you?
Okay.
I'd like to make a comment before I'd like to ask a question to either one of you two. My comment is, Barbara, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we're in the 1980s, and unfortunately people are not going to be abstinent, and we're going to have to give them a choice, and especially the children, we're going to have to educate them, because education is the greatest tool against all this pornography.
Oh, let me answer that.
Oh, please, Barbara, go ahead.
No generation, American generation, has had more sex education than ours. And no generation of Americans has seen more promiscuity, more unwanted pregnancy, more venereal disease, and more promiscuity. Now, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to get a connection here. You see? You don't have to. You have to preach the truth, teach the truth. Because we want to lift people to the level that their Creator intended. We want to foster a true and healthy idea of what true committed love is, because it fosters a strong family life, which is ultimately the core of a stable society.
Joan, if contraceptives were not as readily available and encouraged, do you think that it would affect whether or not teenagers would be having intercourse at the frequency and the number of partners that they are having sex?
In fact, what we see in family planning clinics and what we've seen in the research as well is that most young people are already sexually active for at least 9 months before they ever come to a family planning clinic. So the issue of contraceptives encouraging them to become sexually active, I think, is really a non-issue.
Barbara, do you know if that's a true statement?
Yes, that is a true statement, and you have to get to the reason behind that. It takes a girl from between 8 to 12 months after she has become sexually active before she will consider using any kind of contraception. She doesn't want her sex to look calculated.
No, I understand, but let me just get back to the fact that she's having sex. She's not using contraception, and she's not saying no.
That's exactly right, because she hasn't been taught. She hasn't been taught.
Perhaps.
May
We don't
I
know.
say
That's
something
an
about-
assumption. Go ahead.
May I say something about sex education? Because I think that's a really important issue. I think that unfortunately most sex education, I mean, the issue about whether or not there are really good sex education programs across this country is one that's misunderstood. I don't believe there are. A lot of what passes for sex education is really just the facts and not dealing with decision-making,
Okay.
etc.
I'm going to take another...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I think you made your point, and if I may, I'm going to take another call. We have...
Sure.
Is it Nadia from Malibu?
Nadia from Malibu. I totally agree with Joan. We need contraception more than we need God in the bedroom. Not everybody in this country believes in God. And Barbara, we are in the 80s. Why don't you separate it? This country has a separation of church and state, and I think that we should be allowed to be educated, and by saying no is not enough. People have to have a choice. And contraception and abstinence, I would choose contraception over this abstinence, because people are not going to do it. So.
Thank you for your comments. Let's go to Taboo from Pennsylvania.
Yes, thank you. Barbara, I support you. I support you fully. Obviously, the first thing we have to look at is profit. If we take the profit out of sex education, Joan has no job. There's no place to go. Joan doesn't want to be without a job. Neither do the people who've advocated education. As you said, through the past 50 years, we've had more education on sex than any other subject, maybe. Yet we've got the worst conditions brought on by the indiscriminate use of sex than at any other time in our national history. And as far as these people who say, I don't believe in God, I don't want God in my bedroom, they have no choice. And the separation of church and state is to separate themselves from the state. They are church. The church is within us.
Taboo, I want to thank you for your comments. Joan, let me give you an opportunity to make your point again in terms of what you see going on in New York City and why you feel this campaign is so important.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say before was what's going on in television in this country as well. I mean, there are 20,000 comments in television programs and scenes in television programs every year. That's a powerful message to everyone, young people included. What we need to do is build a climate that supports what American people, most of us, already believe and want to do. A climate that says, yes, it's a good thing to avoid an unintended pregnancy, yes, it's a good thing to lower abortion rates, and that if we can talk about this and be responsible sexual beings, we can achieve that together.
Thank you. And you have about 30 seconds, Barbara?
Contraception does not lower abortion rates, though. We see more abortions every year, and there's not a birth control pill around that will give a girl back her reputation, that will make her feel like she's not being used and abused. I speak to teenage girls all the time. 99.9% of them do not want to be having sex. They want to be loved, they want to date to the prom, they want to be held, but they do not want to be having sex. They have to be taught that chastity is a beautiful virtue that lifts them, as I said before, to the level that our Creator intended.
Thank you.
And we are in the 80s, believe me.
Thank you.